You're listening to Edge Radio TV. The views and opinions expressed in this program are that of the host or guests, and not the Edge Radio Network or its advertisers or affiliates.
It's a movement. We're talking about unity. We're talking about unity. So we're aimed to taking down the system of race by educating, enlightening, informing, and positively debating with those who have counterviews.
Welcome to Talk About Unity, and this is March the 2nd, 2021, and man, we're already rolling in March. We're rolling deep already, and you see I'm going solo today. I'm without my co-host, Richard Jennings. But I got a great show for you today because we're going to talk about something really interesting that you probably heard a lot about, and that is critical race theory. But I entitled our show today, Getting Critical About Race Theory, because there's a lot of information we're going to impart to you. And I happen to be blessed with my friend and my cohort in crime, Brother George Middleton. And we're going to have him in a second, but I want to set the stage here because if you haven't heard the buzz about critical race theory, a great example would be what happened this past week at Coca-Cola. The Coca-Cola, the Fortune 500 mega power, who were slammed for diversity training that urged workers to be less white. In one of their statements, they said that in the U.S. and Western nations, white people are socialized to feel that they are inherently superior because they are white. This was part of Coca-Cola's training. And so a lot of flack and a lot of things have happened about that. Coca-Cola basically got slammed for diversity training that urged those people that people be less white. So that's what we're going to talk about. And to assist me in that dialogue today on Getting Critical About Race Theory is my good friend. I want to bring him in now, and co-worker in our labor to deconstruct race, cognitive behavioral therapist, George Middleton. Welcome, George, to the show.
Good morning, Garland. How are you today?
I'm great, and I'm glad to have you here. Now, let me go ahead and set the stage for this, and we'll begin the dialogue. If anyone who knows George Middleton and Carlin Charleston, we get in the room, you better clear the room because there's going to be lots of things happening. Lots of education is going to go forth. But I'm going to set the stage for what we're going to talk about today. This all started I'll say this part of where we're talking about in critical race theory started in September of last year when President Trump issued an executive order excluding federal contracts from any diversity and inclusion training that was interpreted as containing what he called divisive concepts. Race or sex stereotyping or race or sex scapegoating. He said it's too divisive in our country, and it was very divisive. And among those was, of course, this thing called critical race theory. And so as a result of that, there were cancellations to a lot of the diversity, inclusion, and equity training that was happening at companies around the country. And civil rights organizations kind of were up in arms. And they were condemning the executive order that was put out by the president. And then President Biden came into office, and on his first day, as he was doing all of these executive orders on his first day in office, he not only removed the ban, but he also mandated that the government agencies begin to promote more diversity. And so you saw kind of a spike in people saying, hey, we're going to get back into this training. So the first question, George, I want to ask you about that in view of what President Trump did and then the reversal by President Biden. What was right? What was proper? What do you think needed to be done? Was President Trump right in ending that kind of training? And what's President Biden's view? What is your take on all of that?
The former president his decisions were a mixture of racial beliefs and reactions. So his response is in alignment with the work that I do. However, his reasoning was not necessarily matched with the intent. So in other words, he responded from a white identity, from a white mindset. But he didn't, he still, in spite of that, made a decision that supports the research about diversity training.
So the net result, in your view, is that it was a good thing to do that, or did we need President Biden to come back and reverse that? So you're saying you would prefer to go with what he did, but not necessarily the rationale by which he did it.
Yeah, and you know from our many conversations, I stay away from morality judgments, good and bad, right or wrong. I only focus on effective versus ineffective. So his response was, and I wouldn't even put it in the area of effective because it didn't accomplish the goal. Okay, but the action is more in alignment with the type of work that you and I are doing, even though his rationale was not accurate.
Okay.
I know it sounds really confusing.
Yeah, we're gonna clear that up
once we get into. Yeah,
we'll clear it up because let's go ahead and get a discussion about what CRT is, and let's look at that. And we'll pop this on the screen. I want to pop up that graphic that says what is critical race theory, and read through that so you can see that. And I want you to analyze that because we're going to break this thing down, George, so that everybody understands. But because it says here that critical race theory is the view that the law and legal institutions are inherently racist, and that race itself, instead of being biologically grounded and natural, is a socially constructed concept that is used by white people to further their economic and political interest at the expense of people of color. So what is your view on the definition for critical race theory here? And what is not making a value judgment here, George, but what is the good part of that? What is the part that needs to be dissected a little further?
Right. So critical race theory is an intellectual attempt at trying to respond to race ideology. Race ideology is a theory. It was birthed from a theory of the European at that time in the 1600s that tried to associate cognitive ability, cognitive level with phenotypes.
Wait, I want you to say that again, George. I want you to say that one more time because I think that those first few lines you use there are fundamental to what we're talking about. You drew a distinction between critical race theory and race theory or race ideology. So say that one more time because I think it's that fundamental and people really need to get that because that's going to be the basis for what we're going to talk about from here forward. So say that one more time.
Yeah, critical race theory is an attempted intellectual response to race ideology. And race ideology was birthed from a European theory that tried to associate cognitive ability with phenotype.
All right. So let's now what part of that and in critical race theory, when they talked about that we're inherently, that legal institutions and the law and all these things are inherently racist, and that's the basis for which we take actions in this country because we believe that our Constitution, our founding documents, and the people that were exercising those documents were inherently racist. So is that a great premise to begin with today?
So in breaking down this description, the view that law and legal institutions are inherently racist, and that race itself, instead of being biologically grounded and natural, is a socially constructed concept. So we can stop right there. Race is based on identity, and identity is in race is only two. There's only two identities in race, and there are identities of color, black and white. Mm-hmm. And what happens often is people will conflate cultural identity with racial identity, and they're different. So if you note on the consensus form, there's two blocks, black and white, and then they have under each block which cultural group can identify in which box.
So is that a mistake then for them to have? So are they conflating then with race with culture, and is that the mistake that we make in our society, that we believe we try to make them equal and they are not?
The census form is just one of the many ways that race and culture are conflated. So people actually will state that Asians are a race, that Hispanics are a race, that Germans are a race. No, unless you identify by a color, that's not a racial label. Only color is a racial label.
So when we
turn cultural.
Okay, so when they talk about but we would agree that as they identify in critical race theory, the definition that it is in fact a socially constructed concept.
That's correct.
And so
now to take that further, a socially constructed concept that is used by white people to further their economic and political interests. That's where it starts to go off track, because what that statement in this definition does, it begins the division and the divisive nature that the former president was trying to address, but just not so nuanced and not so accurately. Okay, race was not created by white people. White is an invented label. That's part of the social construct. So race was invented or created by a cultural group, which created the divisionary labels of white and black. And the reason that race is so effective is because of that division, because it's in that division that keeps two groups of really the same people divided so that they cannot talk to each other, communicate together, and work together.
Very fundamental. That was really good. And I'm going to probably ask you, I'm probably in this show today, George, I'm going to ask you to say a few things twice, because that was a really good one right there as well. Because as you were saying that race wasn't invented, this is the definition that they're using. They're saying it's socially constructed concept by white people, and you're saying it wasn't created by white people, it was created by the culture. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to take a break here, a commercial break. We're going to come back and we're going to start right there. I want to hit that again, and then we're going to go forward and talk about some of the tenets of CRT and how that feeds into our race ideology. So we'll talk about that when we come back from the break. Hello, I'm Carlin Charleston, Executive Director of Erase Races, and I want to take this time to invite you to an opportunity to change the world. Perhaps you're too busy and too preoccupied to help change the world, but please take the next 2 minutes to listen to how we plan to do it. The divisiveness and bitterness observed in our country today is not a coincidence of the current administration or any administration before. It is also not a product of a singular or multiple infractions by a zealous or racist police force. No, the race problem precedes the founding of our country. Our very history speaks in racial language, and most everything that happens in our society now carries with it racial baggage. It simply does not have to stay that way. The Erase Race campaign has only one objective: the unifying of all Americans, and that without regard to the color of their skin. This is a difficult challenge because of our history, but we can do it if we believe. If we believe that Martin Luther King Jr. was right when he said, "We are tied together in a single garment of destiny," we can do it. We can do it if we believe the founding principles upon which our country was built, that all men are created equal, we can do it. And if we believe that God did in fact make all nations of men from one man, and that we are all therefore part of one family, one race, then we can do it. Yes, the task is monumental, but the reward is worth the challenge. If you would like to join us as we change America and inevitably change the world, go to eraseraces.com, sign up today, and welcome to Erase Races, because there is only one race and you're in it. Welcome back to Talk About Unity, where today we're talking about race theory and getting critical about it. I've got my guest and friend, Brother George Middleton out of Indianapolis, cognitive behavioral therapist, and he's been saying some really fundamental things. And like I told him earlier in the show, he's probably going to have to repeat things twice, maybe 3 times, because not only is it going to be good for you, it's going to be good for me as well. And so when we left off, George, you were making this statement, which I thought was really fundamental. Most people don't understand this in our country because critical race theory, I have this idea that that race, of course, is not biological. It is a socially constructed concept, but they identified that it was invented by white people. You said that part of it kind of goes askew. Can you repeat that again and tell us about that, what you were saying there?
Yes. You said it really better than I did just now, that in race ideology, there are 2 identities, white and black. They were both socially constructed. So there was no original white man or no original black man. It was just man. The European sought to improve in his perspective on that creation by giving it these labels based on a theory that there was some cognitive differences based on how people looked.
And now, were those Europeans you talked about, when you say that the Europeans did that, were those European scientists that were in Europe, or were you talking about Europeans that had come to the New World and they were injecting that into the new America?
No, it was more economically and politically driven. That's really the primary motivation of the ideology. The European needed to create an ideology that would justify the type of barbarous treatment that the transatlantic slave trade came to be recognized for. So in order to sell that back to the king and his people at home, they needed to create this belief system that said this certain group that does not look like us aren't really as intelligent and aren't even really human beings. Their curly hair is really closer to animal hair, and they don't know the English language. All of these things that were culturally originated with that group, they took those differences and compared them to their European standards and put moral judgments on them, qualitative judgments on them, and use it in their favor for economic interests.
And so those were the Europeans. Of course, that influence was brought here to the New World where we were beginning the slave trade. How does that today, when you think about where we are today, are we just still awash in that? Are you saying that mentality has now been perpetuated for centuries and centuries, and that foundational idea is the one that drives what we see today when we use the terms black and white?
Correct. In 1865, when slavery was abolished, they abolished the physical system, but they maintained the social construct. So there's a difference. The system of the ideology was abolished. And I would even take that a little further and say that it wasn't really abolished. It's transformed.
Okay.
Because they had to get the same results. They were built, the country was built on a significant level of free labor. And so to just get rid of free labor when you have all of these systems depending on it, that's just not a human, that's not a natural human inclination. Regardless of your moral standpoint, typically you're not going to just totally terminate your financial income base based on a law. So they found ways to legally change what was going on in order to get the same results.
Okay, so then it sounds like that. Okay, so for instance, you agree with CRT. I agree with CRT when they say that race is a socially constructed concept. Seems like the answer would be the deconstruction of that concept as a premise for you people on your side, on my side, CRT side. Seems like everybody agrees with that. Why doesn't everybody say, let's deconstruct that concept? Why are some people still saying they are living inside of that concept? What do you think?
That is a great question, and that is the heart of my work, and really the heart of your work as well. Although we kind of go different paths. Identity is the biggest challenge to racial deconstruction. Some people are flexible enough in mind to consider, what if I'm not what I've been saying I am for all these many years? But a large majority of people are not mentally wired to immediately embrace that notion, because identity is the base of everything we are and everything we do and everything we believe. So when you challenge an identity, you're challenging a belief system, and belief systems run very, very deep. And based on the emotional makeup of that person, you will get a range of responses from complete denial, anger, to actual open-mindedness, a willingness to consider. And so, you run the range of behavior on that human spectrum.
So it sounds like we're in a catch-22 then, because if your identity has been hoisted upon you by this social construction of this concept, and that is the thing that is keeping you from being able to see yourself or to take action to deconstruct the concept, it seems like that concept is going to continue to force that identity upon us, and that identity is going to keep us trapped inside of that concept. So it's like this circular thing where we can't get out of it because we're trapped in our identity. What is our solution for that?
Well, that's human behavior, and that's why it requires those of us who have the ability of objectivity, and that's primarily it, objectivity. Race is like a bad marriage, to put it in an analogy. And when you're in a bad marriage, typically the husband nor the wife can fix their own situation, so they go get a therapist. Okay. Now, what makes a therapist really effective is his ability to be objective. What makes a therapist really effective is his ability to not use moral judgments and appear to take sides. In race, what often happens in diversity training, implicit bias training, anti-racism training, all those trainings, is one of the trainers is taking the position of the husband or the wife, and therefore has no objective credibility. So the work that I'm doing specifically, and that you and I are doing in a more broad base, is I am posing that objectivity, that side of objectivity. So I begin with me, because in this work of deconstructing race, it's not about dismantling race. It's not about fighting race. It's not about being anti-racist. It's only about exploring yourself. Begin with yourself and make a conscious decision about, do racial values match your human values? And to be honest, right? Because I can respect honesty. If you are a straight out front, Confederate flag waving, I like white people only person, I can respect that, because you're being honest. You're looking me in my face and you're saying, this is how I feel. And I can respect it. Would I agree? No, but everybody has a right to their own, their own beliefs, right? So the work is not to try to force you into submission to a particular belief. That's how this problem got started in the first place, by forced submission into a belief system.
So when you think about people opposite, who have different viewpoints, how we attack this issue, such as Robin DiAngelo, and when she talks about white fragility, or Ibrahim X. Kendi, who talks about how to be an anti-racist. So are you saying they're the other side that's forcing or trying to force something because they're saying how to be an anti-racist? It's about being in that middle so that you're not left or right and you're able to objectively look at this issue. So what is the proper viewpoint from as you stand and look at both sides, whether you're anti-racist or people who are saying that race isn't an issue. So you got those two kind of extremes. The race is not an issue. Over here they're saying you got to be anti-racist. So what's in the middle there?
Well, Robin, those names you mentioned, Robin and Abram, Ta-Nehisi Coates, they are racism experts. They are studied in all things racism, in all things race. So they can tell you the history of it. They can tell you the dynamics of it. They can tell you the impacts of it. So they are very steeped knowledge base inside that race paradigm. However, it's important to understand that being knowledgeable about race is not the same as being able to provide a solution to race. So my work is in studying the solution to counteracting a very well-honed ideological machine. So they serve a purpose in the area of education, in the area of awareness. But unfortunately, there's one flaw in their strategy, is that they validate and perpetuate race, the ideology, the belief system, and the identity. So Robin comes from a white identity. Abram, Ta-Nehisi, and the like come from a Black identity. And those are two different experiences. Both are right in their experiences because those are experiences that they had. However, neither one of them are equipped to provide a solution. And if you look at all their readings, all of their work, there's really no effective solution in it. You know, Robin's approach is to tell white people, pretty much like what happened with the Coke story. Stop being who you are. Well, if you're white, you're white. And then, you know, even the delivery of that is going to be offensive to most because you are striking at a person's identity. That's like one's last name. You're a Charleston. So if I start talking about the Charleston name, right or wrong, I could be right about the Charleston name, but that's not going to make you feel any endeared to me to take any change other than to try to introduce my face to your fist, probably. Okay. So there's a way of, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Well, it's not only that, but it's your perceived level of objectivity. So, you can't be objective if you take on a racial identity. I always say you can't solve racial problems with racial mindsets.
Great. That's really good. And hey, and so the point you made about they can't offer solutions, we're going to talk about that when we come back after the break. We're going to talk about how you go about this thing that we call deconstruction of race, because I do think that's the solution, as you were saying, that when you begin identifying as a race, then all your solutions inside of race only perpetuate the problem that you're trying to solve. And so we're going to come and talk about some of those solutions, because George is an author, and he's written some great books on the subject, and we're going to talk about that when we come back. And especially, there we go, Can You Be an American and a Color Too? Outstanding book, because that's one I was getting ready to bring up as we talk about how we go about deconstructing race. And we'll talk about that when we come back after the break.
Edge Radio TV is holding auditions for new show hosts. Are you a subject matter expert, professional, influencer, book author, thought leader, or business owner with an educational or motivational platform? Then we want to meet you. Send a link of some of your work to edgeradio20@gmail.com and be sure to put audition in the subject line. Join the Edge Radio TV family. Edge TV, because truth still matters.
Welcome back to Talk About Unity, and a very educational show we've got today as we talk about getting critical about race theory. And I've got my friend and cohort in this labor of deconstructing race, Brother George Middleton, a cognitive behavioral therapist. He's out of Indianapolis, Indiana, and I've been there to see him, and he was not there when I went to see him. And so next time I go, he will make sure that he makes up for that. But before we went to the break, George brought up something very fundamental. He talked about how we're caught into this circular identity thing where we believe based on the way people perceive us, and because they perceive us that way and we perceive ourselves that way, we act accordingly. And that is not going to allow us to get out of the race paradigm that we're in. And so George is an author and has done his great work called Can You Be an American and a Color Too? And in that particular book, he goes through this process of articulating something that I'd never seen anyone else do in America before. And he talks about how to deconstruct race. And so I want to get you to give us a little primer and give us some examples of what that means, George, because I think this is going to be so instrumental in people understanding that when we talk about race ideology and what it takes to get out of there, because George made this, I don't want to rehash the show. You're going to have to go back and rewind to watch what George said earlier. But he was making the point that the solutions that are being offered by people on either side, the anti-racist or the non-race people, are still identifying based on the concept of the social construct race. So that's operating inside the racial paradigm, and you're not going to be able to solve it that way. And so that's very basic for people to understand when you start talking about solutions. And so solutions begin with the deconstruction of the concept. And so that's what I want George to talk to us about now. So take it away, George. And I tell you what, use some of those great examples you got in that book, because they're outstanding. And I still say that one day we're going to hit the road. It's going to be me and you, George, going around the country talking about this. So go ahead, George, and give us some.
Let's rock that. So the racial deconstruction process is a 3-step process. Step number 1 is education. Step number 2 is self-reflection. And then step number 3 is application. So this book, Can You Be American and a Color Too, which is formatted off of a cognitive behavioral question. It's not intended for you to answer it correctly. It's intended for you to answer it authentically, to assess where you are in the state of your human development and how it is aligned with race ideology. So this book covers all 3 of those steps. So first, in the area of education, before we can even have a productive discussion, we must all be working on the same communication roadmap. The terminology must be standardized. Secondly, after that, the self-reflection then is based off a simple question. Are you your color or are you your culture? That's the beginning of you beginning to self-reflect on what that question means to you, because most people actually don't take the time to think about that. And then the third piece, which is the most important part, is now once you've made a decision, let's say you're a devout, conscious racist, and you've gone through the first 2 steps, and after your answer to that second question is, I'm a color, I'm white, I'm happy about it, and I'm going to stay, and I believe in white supremacy, and I am going to continue down that line. Okay, you can put the book down because your work is done. You know what you are, and you can live life accordingly. Most people, however, and through my experiences in doing this work, realize, I say this is what I am, but when I look at my values, it's not really in alignment with what I'm saying I am. And it's more important for me to align my values with my identity. So something has to switch has to change for those 2 to come together. And that's the self-reflection part. Then once you say, I am no longer a racial identity, whether it's black or white, this book presents what is called racial deconstruction activities. And they're designed to reflect scenarios in every systemic environment: educational, financial, law enforcement, judiciary, health, um, public health, all the things that we see on the news daily that make headlines, from George Floyd to Breonna Taylor, to the vaccination disparities, all of these issues that make the front news leading with race on a daily basis. So, for example, let me pull out a deconstruction activity that well, before I do that, let me go through the 8 points that the work is based on, because if you're not able to embrace or get through, intellectually observe or embrace these 8 points, it'll make it very difficult for you to do the deconstruction activity.
Let me ask you one question before you start there, George. So, because I think this is very fundamental, and this is the stuff that actually is needed in all of our businesses, institutions, organizations across the board in our country. How are they going to receive this? So when you go in and tell them, here's what I want to do, when it's compared against what Robin DiAngelo and Ibrahim X. Kendi, what those stuff that they have to offer, they're going in and charging people hundreds of thousands of dollars to go in and pitch inside of the race paradigm. What is it going to take for them to say, they're not offering us solutions, and why would they choose George Middleton and Carlin Charleston coming in saying, we're here to deconstruct your race issue?
Yeah, and that's a huge challenge. That's a huge challenge because, again, they're operating from within inside the race paradigm. So there's a perception of credibility, even in view of their statistical failure. And if you just start Googling the effectiveness of diversity training, you're going to see a consistent pattern that things like the diversity training has short-term impact, but not long-term.
Yeah, we would probably know just by the fact that we're here at this point in our society after having done so much of it for so many years. All this training has proven fruit.
But here's the thing. That's the insanity of it, is that people see that it's not working, yet still thinking, well, if we just do more, that maybe we're just not doing enough. So if we just do more, this time it'll really work.
So doubling down on the race ideology even more, just doubling down, and it's getting worse and worse. Okay, well, go ahead. You had your 8 points you were going to hit, your eight points.
Okay, number one, humans are not a race. We are a species. We're not a social construct. We are genetically based. And then that's a big one. That's really hard for a lot of people. When I'm presenting this work, that really blows a lot of people's minds because they consider themselves to be a race.
Well, and then
they look at everyone else as a race.
Yeah, because that gets people into the whole race paradigm. So you're saying we should be going around saying we are humans.
We're just humans.
We're just humans.
Human is we're just humans.
That's great. A friend of mine got me on that the other day. I was talking to her about the fact that somebody had made a comment about my wife looking like she's Egyptian and European, and I'm looking more like Nigerian and something else, whatever. And I said, well, we're all mixed. And this person responded to me and said, no, we're not all mixed. We're all 100% human. I was like, oh, you got me. You got me.
I love it. I love it.
Okay, go ahead.
And not to disparage those identities, whether it's Ethiopian, Nigerian, those aren't to be disparaged. And actually, as weird as this may sound, I'm not disparaging those who identify by race either. I'm just making factual, objective observations and speaking factual, objective truth. It's up to the listener to decide what their moral template is with the information that they're being presented. All right, so the second foundation is race is not real.
Woo! Big one. Yeah, I like that. Go ahead.
It is not biologically determined. It is a made up social construct. And I know that sounds redundant, to say made up and social construct, but I wanted to tie those together. Social construct is something people make up, and race is a made up social construct. It is not real. Number 3, everyone can be prejudiced. We all have biases. And what I would do, and I'll probably add this into an upgrade in it when I as my work goes, I always gather more information. So my next edition, I'll add this in. Before you can have a bias, you have to have a belief. So that's just something to think about. Number four, not everyone can be racist. And this is a hot button right here, because you see this thread in a lot of non-productive arguments and discussions about race. Not everyone can be racist. To be racist means that you have systemic power to implement generational and mass oppression on a particular group of people in education, finance, employment, government, judicial, housing, etc. Any of those systems. To be racist means you have that ability to implement your prejudice, which we all have, in a systemic fashion.
So when you talk about that, is that saying, so now it sounds like, before you're saying race is not real. This sounds like it's inside the race paradigm. So that one, so you're saying, because you use that point about we got to change the terminology. So is this the terminology inside the paradigm though? When you say, if you go down the road of saying to be racist, you got to, first of all, we got to operate inside the race paradigm, right?
Yes, you are. Racist is a practitioner of race ideology.
Okay. Hey, so you're halfway. That's 4. Let's take a break, and we're gonna come back this is our last break before we end out the show. We'll have about 10 minutes left, so we'll start there. You're at 4. We'll start at 5 when we come back here after the break. All right. Don't push me because I'm close to the edge.
I'm trying not to lose my head.
Hey, this is the Talk About Unity show where I bring the talk.
And I bring the unity.
And together we talk about unity. Unity is what matters. Come on. And right now in our country, that's what we've got to do. So we do that here at Talk About Unity on the Edge Radio Network. Be with us every week.
It's going to be awesome. It always is. And I tell you what, the more we seek first to understand, then be understood, we make progress.
And we like to do that. And that's why everybody's on the brink. We love what we do at Edge Radio because everybody's on the edge. We bring them back from the edge and we bring the unity. So we're just glad. Edge Radio Network, every Tuesday morning, 10 a.m. Talk about unity, because here at Edge Radio Network, truth still matters. Welcome back, and we're on our last segment here of Talk About Unity on March the 2nd, and I've got my guest, my friend, George Middleton, cognitive behavioral therapist out of Indianapolis, and he's going through these tenets of his racial deconstruction found in his work, Can You Be an American and a Color Too? We were at number 4, and so go ahead and continue where you were there, George, and continue on.
And so the other thing that I will add on my next edition of this book, I call it a workbook, is that although not everyone can be a racist, there's a question that often comes up: well, can Black people be racist too? And I add to that, as long as it supports white supremacy. So anybody of any skin color can be a racist as long as it supports white supremacy, because that's what race is. Race is an ideology of white supremacy. There's nowhere in the world where there is a non-white group mass and generationally oppressing a white group, because that's not how race was designed. It was designed for one particular color to be on top and one color to be on bottom. And often where the disconnect comes in is people have different definitions of racist and racism and all that. And that's why I'm doing this work.
Let me ask you this quickly about that, George. Is that an American, when you say an American phenomenon, you say it because, and would that be more an American phenomenon, and is it because we're just a more diverse population so that you have that white at the top, black at the bottom, whereas most societies are more homogeneous and are pretty much all the same color? So is that more prevalent in those societies where there's more integration?
Integration is not synonymous with power. Just because there may be more people in a particular neighborhood, more people in a particular organization, position is not power. Power is power. Power doesn't even require you to be in a position, because it's purely power. How often, and the reason why that's important is there's an often used statistic that by 2050 and beyond, that whites will be a minority, as if sheer numbers will in and of themselves dismantle racism. And nothing could be further from the truth, because racism has morphed with the era that it finds itself in. It isn't about skin color, it's about power distribution. And so just because you have more of a particular group there, it's not visual, that's a visible reflection, but it's not an accurate reflection on who really holds the power. So when people say, well, you had a Black president, or you had a Black police chief, or you got, some other first Black this or whatever, those are distractions meant for you to say exactly that, so that you wouldn't be conscious of the power that has not transferred, that has not changed hands.
So when you talk about then, because we talked about the centrality of white and Black dynamics inside of race. So if when they talk about those numbers changing, and even though it is a power issue, then does that phase out? Because think about our population. We would have what we call more biracial, mixed race, or other races coming into having larger numbers. So then does race still carry the impact, and does the Black-white binary go away, or how does the Black-white binary play in this changing environment or changing culture that we're supposed to have in 2040 or 2050?
Reality doesn't change belief systems. And we're seeing that clearly in the state of our country today, that there's objective truth, and then there's this long-held belief system. So just because numbers change doesn't mean the belief systems change. If you've been raised to believe that a certain color is the standard and another color is the less than that standard, it doesn't matter how many numbers that you're in. You're going to behave the same way that you believe. If you think inferior and you get around of other people that look like you, that think the same way, then you have a collective group of inferior thinking people. If you think superior, and it could just be you and 3 or 4 other people, but your mindset is I'm superior compared to you, you're going to behave that way. And you're going to do whatever you need to do to match your reality to your belief.
Well, let me ask you this then. If in fact that is the way you think, and I'm inferior because society and culture has taught me that I'm inferior, and I carry that mindset, and I believe that there will be a time when I won't be inferior because we'll get bigger numbers, and when those numbers change, that I'm going to be superior. And if the numbers actually do change, and 20 years down the road, does my mindset change? Or are you, and as a behavioral therapist, are you saying that's what the point you're making, that's not going to change your mindset, and you're saying even if you do get greater numbers, it's not going to change?
That belief is like the carrot in front of a horse. You keep chasing after it, but you never catch it. So you think, well, in 2050, life is going to be great.
So you're saying we could be here today if we could change our mindsets. There's no need to wait till the numbers change.
When you match your conscious decisions with your values, your life can change like that.
Great. Okay, you got some more to go, George. We got about 2-3 minutes left in the show, so make sure I want to get through all of your points here.
Okay. So number 5, color is not the same as culture. Color is a race-based system of economic hierarchical distribution. And there's plenty of research that supports that. You'll note in any racially researched economic salary income data, you'll note that the lighter your skin color, the more access and income that you have the ability to attract. The darker your skin color, you're lower on the scale. So there's a lot of research study that shows that correlation between skin color and income, gender and income. Okay. Number 6, if you identify by color, black or white, then you're not necessarily racist. However, you are being racial. And that's important to understand.
Great.
Number 7, this is a little more complex, but this is where the rubber meets the road. The terms disproportionate and disparities refer to the behavior of systems, not the behavior of systems and their outcomes, not the behaviors of the people the systems are servicing. So what happens a lot is, let's take the most apparent issue in our society today, which is the continual news stories about Black men being killed by police. Statistically speaking, in any research that you'll find, you'll see that there is a disparity and disproportionate treatment of the system of law enforcement and the Black male population. What happens in discussions that way is people will say, well, if they would, meaning the Black people, would just comply or not do crime or behave this way or not do this or not do that, as if the numbers and outcomes are based totally on the behavior of that particular population. And that just doesn't hold water. That is not what disparities is about. It is about system behavior, not individuals' behavior.
That's a good one. I got one question on that as we get ready to wind up the show and get to your last point. But do you think that that keeping track of that particular statistic is simply a function of race ideology? Because and I'm thinking about, like, there's the story of George Floyd, and there's also the story of Tony Timpa, which happened in Dallas in, I think it was 2016, who was killed the same way. And he was, of course, what we call a white person. He was killed the same way as George Floyd. And I'm so in a regular world, not racialized, though they would be in the same category of people killed in a certain way by officers, and we would not go to the color. So I'm saying, are we kind of like creating that with our race ideology?
That's a great question. And again, the only way to determine the authentic answer from that is to look at the statistical based research. Everything has a pattern. So if you see, if the technique that was applied to George Floyd is equally applied across socioeconomic status, racial status, cultural status, I'm not talking about whether it is a good or bad technique. I'm just saying whether it's equally applied, then you would not see any disparities. You wouldn't see disproportionate statistical treatment. Everything would be appropriate to the percentage of representation in each group. But when you see that a particular technique is applied more often in this group in a disproportionate manner, creating a disparity of outcome, then you have to question it.
Okay, that's a good one.
So
I wanted you to close your last point. We got a minute left. Go ahead and close out the show for me, George, with your last point. And remember that point 7, because we're going to talk about that. We're going to have a good one on that later. All right, go ahead, George.
Okay. The impact, this is really important, guys. The impact of race cannot be reduced by ignoring it. It can only occur by conscious acknowledgement of it. And that's hugely important. There are a lot of videos out there and celebrities out there saying, oh, just don't talk about it, and it's not a problem. That's how racism continues. It needs your belief in it. It needs you to believe that it's credible. And then it just needs you to subconsciously go on about your business and act as if there's nothing to see here. So that's how it moves forward. So any I don't see color talk, don't talk about race, that's not a statistically credible or scientifically valid approach to addressing a behavioral issue, a belief, a mindset, which leads to behavioral issue. My work is based on an evidence-based behavioral intervention format. So nothing I'm saying here, this book is not a shot in the dark. Race is an ideology that impacts behavior. And if you want to change behavior, you have to first address the belief system. Diversity training, implicit bias training does not address the belief system. It only educates and makes you aware.
Okay, all right, George. All right, okay, good, George. I'm gonna have to have you back. All right, I'm gonna have to bring you back next week so we can finish up, because we have to cover 7 and 8 again. All right, that's really good. We could do a whole show on 7 and 8. We're gonna talk about that. So good stuff. Hey, I appreciate you, George. A lot of good information. I'm gonna take this and educate some people with the video excerpts I'm gonna take out of here, and we'll try to have you back. I'm actually probably gonna have you back next.